So, welcome, Kaumudi. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me. I'm Kaumudi Goda. I also go by KG. I am from India by origin. I consider my formative years and the way I think and the way I was educated and the influences on my way of working were heavily influenced by the US because I studied there and worked there for about a decade. Subsequently, I moved and got some experience in Asia and APAC for roughly under a decade, and now I'm here in EU. So, like many others out there in the world, I've been a little bit of a traveler, and I've had the opportunity to live and travel to and experience life in different regions across the world. And therefore, I like to think of myself as very much a student of culture and anthropology. I'm fascinated by how much there is magnificent diversity in all of us, and at the same time, how universal some of our core needs and values are.
Mm, very good. Thank you for sharing that. And I know you're also active in both the coalition for the AI coalition and also DEIB, the council there. So, yeah, thank you.
So, yes, by way of background, I'm a lawyer by training, Susan. I'm an active coach. I've been involved with ICF for a long time, and the way our paths have crossed is because I volunteered to participate in the tremendous initiative you've undertaken around AI and coaching. And so that's where I'm passionate about these days, looking at ethics and future as it pertains to how we help each other and how we have positive societal impact.
Mm. And also I was fortunate to be part of your podcast recently. So I don't know if you'd like to just talk about that for our viewers.
That was the most wonderful thing that you and I bonded over is my organization is called the Human Conversation because I truly believe that true progress can only happen when we have a genuine conversation, rising above all potential niggly differences. And the bonding factor was you yourself used to call your organization the Humane Org, although I know there's been an interesting development. So, yes, I have a podcast called The Human Conversation that focuses on democratizing the idea of ethical decision making.
Mm, mm. And actually, part of the reason for these fireside chats is to open up that dialogue. So yeah, we have a lot of synergy. So, for the fireside chat, it's an informal conversation. But what I wanted to start with is if you could share a moment where you've observed human connection and AI coming together in coaching.
Yes, at a most personal level, I am a parent and I have two children in high school. And one of the things I notice as a coach and someone who deeply prioritizes human connection is how many different ways human beings are vulnerable, particularly in those moments that require emotional sensitivity. Children are a great case study for that. In high school, for example, I encountered a child of a fellow parent who was struggling with neurodiversity issues. Understanding the sensitivity, the debiasing required in the system, the patience, the human intervention required to ensure fairness, equity, and personalization of care for that child so they don't get crushed by an insensitive system. I recognize firsthand. For example, having a human being who's empathetic, who understands a traumatized child and helps them cope with so many factors of young adulthood, neurodiversity, challenges of high school in terms of both social and academic pressures.
Mm,
There, the depth of human touch, human intuition is tremendous. But at the same time, a counselor in a school can only do so much because there's so much limitation and constraint on time, on capacity, right? And so imagine if there were a safe, carefully monitored system that helped such a neurodiverse child with ADHD problems focus on executive functions such as goal setting, where the child, in between sessions with the counselor, is getting support that is not judgmental, that is not intrusive, that helps them keep on track in terms of their academic deliverables and practicing executive functions, which they need to develop to be a effective functioning adult. So that sort of a combination of AI enhanced counseling can be a game changer, but actually life-saving for a
Mm,
young adult struggling to understand themselves and understand their condition and need, and also adult,
mm,
transfer to adulthood.
mm,
And so for me, that was deeply touching to understand how it could, in fact, if we use AI, enhance that offering a coach, a therapist, or a counselor could provide to a person in need.
mm. And for the young person, agency, feeling that you can participate. Yeah, very good. Uh,
Yeah.
And as we experiment and learn with AI, what principles should we be holding on to or using in order that AI remains human-centered, ethical, and inclusive?
I know, Susan, you and I bonded over the idea of fairness, how important it is that there's equity, fairness of access, democratizing the and ensuring that biases and hurdles are removed so that it's scalable access, support, encouragement, motivation, healing. All of this can benefit everybody equitably. And we know today that, for example, coaching, there's so many privileges that would be required for someone to have access to it: education, technology, finance, systemic, regional, geographic, right? We all experience this during COVID as well. There can be a great divider: access.
Mm,
So on one hand, that I think is a very important factor. And the second thing that, in terms of what is possible, would be, and what is important to prioritize, in addition to equitable access and removing hurdles, democratizing, scaling it up. The second thing for me is it's tremendously important that we keep accountability. There are liability gaps today. There's transparency gap today. In the early 2000s, when the first social media platforms became available, uh, most of humanity engaged. And because it was an infancy then, none of us questioned our privacy rights.
mm,
None of us questioned what happens to our data that I'm inputting, all of my life that I'm living out on these social media platforms. What happens to it? Tremendous success was leveraged on human lives. And today, many of the tech giants are essentially not answerable for how they handle that data. When the first genetic testing came, scores of people paid money to get the testing. But when the same companies went bankrupt, they could then sell that data. Where is the liability there? I think so. The second thing it's really important to keep in mind is the liability, accountability for ensuring societal safety. What's the long-term impact? Is someone keeping an eye on whether we are heading towards something that's potentially unmanageable and dangerous, or keeping some guardrails in place? And the third one for me is remembering that yes, you could automate, but it needs to be keeping in mind that, first of all, of course, human intuition, relational depth, our ability to be empathetic and adjust ourselves based on how the micro cues we're getting on from other people. This is so essentially human, it cannot be replicated. So, that, of course, we have to keep in mind. But in addition, just because we can, should we really make it entirely um, without human centricity? I think ICF and the initiative you're leading is actually focused on human centered AI. And so that's the third bit, understanding that humans cannot be replaced. Certainly, many, many ways in which we can use and engage actively with AI as coaches to enhance our services, to scale it up, to make it accessible, supportive, goal centered, structured, pattern recognition. So many things we could do. We cannot replace human beings. So those
yes.
are the three I think of.
Mm. And and actually, I was curious when you were talking about the data. There are people experimenting with or talking about having personal data banks that you have your own vault and you decide who has access to your data. So it kind of it's reversing who owns the data. It's like you own your data and you give access for a limited period. Is that happening much or talk about it in the EU?
So one of the wonderful things I notice as a recent transplant to EU is they're mostly legislation first. They're very mindfully engaging in a committed, active way to understanding how can we protect our societies, our communities, our human beings. And so there's several legislations in place. We already know that UNESCO has some AI guidelines. The EU AI Act is already in place. So between August 20, I believe 2025 to 2026 is the implementation stage, and then it goes fully into effect from 2026 August, where they really want to provide structured guidance, governance, and literacy to people so that everybody can engage in a safe way. Some of these legislations are very risk centered. So they're attempting to understand what is the potential risk and how can we mitigate it, and what are some penalties and some governance we need to have in place to serve as guardrails. And so the challenge in the question you asked about data vault is that the regulatory and legislative guardrails have some accountability chain challenges. If an organization in the US has developed software that is then purchased by a university in Europe, and in application of that software, a student were harmed in Amsterdam City, in that chain of liability, how far can we go back? And at what point do they dissolve themselves from the liability?
Mm.
So that's for that one challenge. And the other challenge is particularly with AI and technology, it's just spanning the world, and it's so difficult to understand where your data is ending up. It's spliced in a million different ways and in so many different pockets. Are we really able to track down and contain that? And therefore, transparency, ensuring that there is no black box in where is my data going, who is collecting it, and what's happening with, and how is it influencing me, becomes really important at a very granular level for coaching. We were talking big vision, right? At a very granular level in coaching, if the organization I work for is using a chat bot to help me with my career development, to serve in between my actual human coach sessions, what is it monitoring of me? What patterns is it recognizing? And is there going to be impact I cannot opt out of or know about or understand about that will impact org changes, my job, my promotion, my career development? What if there are some AI hallucinations where it sees something doesn't exist, and then the coach is then working off of the patterns that the AI has fed into them? And so these are some of the huge challenges around data autonomy and agency of human beings in these
Mm.
systems.
Well, and it's broader than AI. So yeah, I know the conversation we're having is around AI, but the talk that, what you've just described actually is about the digital technology that, is pervasive throughout our life and work now. And the fact that, as you say, once we have all of this data or this digital fabric, it is hard to know because it's so interwoven. It's, as you say, it's where does it stop and start? But being clear about, for instance, in this scenario you shared about the coaching in an organization, what data is going to be available for your coach to see, and how is it anonymized? And if it's being consumed at organizational level, again, check that it's anonymized, but I imagine it would be anonymized as it's rolled up. It's not personally identifiable.
Absolutely. A big discussion and debate recently in Europe, for example, was if you have wearable health metrics devices. For example, if I'm obese and a smoker and I'm using a wearable device that tracks health metrics and habits that is funded by my employer, do they have rights to that and that data? And how might that data then be influencing their decisions in terms of my liability as an employee? Because they have to pay for health insurance, for example.
Mm.
Are they tracking whether I am responsible, whether I have healthy habits, whether my health will then become a liability for the company? That's super intrusive and it's so hard to track. That's one of the ways in which all of these discussions are informing how regulatory regimes are developing in Europe. For example, they're saying that there must be obviously transparency and opt out. But if you opt out of something, are they actually viable alternatives?
Mm.
I want a coach, but I do not want to use a chatbot because I'm uncomfortable with how it's going to be applied. If I opt out of that, will I still get a fantastic experience from my executive leadership development coach?
Mm,
So have have informed models in place, ensure that there's transparency in understand how it's implemented, what are some risk assessment and mitigation interventions that are built into the system, identifying people who are at risk. For example, in Europe, I'm very much still an underrepresented kind of an identity. And so, how are potential biases uh, taken care of to ensure that I am not underestimated, overlooked, etc., misunderstood culturally? Those kinds of safety precautions in the digital systems, to quote you. And finally, what are the mechanisms for redressal? If
mm,
something goes awfully wrong, or I suspect, is it going to just disappear into a black box? Are there administrative safeguards the organization offers me? Or if that fails, do I have recourse in the court system, in the local government system, something that helps me out? In many, many parts of the world, Susan, as you and I have discussed before, there's absolutely no recourse for people because
mm,
most of the time governments are terribly underfunded, poorly educated, severely lagging behind, and the court systems are completely incapable. I come from the global south. That's very much a danger there. Here in Europe, I think they're being mindful and pragmatic in developing some of these regulatory mechanisms and safety guardrails.
mm. I was curious with your background and the fact that you've got a global perspective. How how do you see the EU AI Act in comparison with what is happening around the rest of the world?
I'm noticing that they are certainly doing a tri-party sort of an alliance where they are actively seeking to work with corporates, the big tech, with the cutting edge developments, educating their legislators and regulators by conversing actively with activists, NGOs, subject matter experts who are the whistleblowers and the vigilant advocates sitting outside of the system of the government, for example. And finally, constantly actively engaging in dialogue with their citizens. They're calls all the time for people to come and participate in conversations, in surveys. And so they're certainly making a lot of effort to ensure multi party alliances are the way that they are attempting to understand the future and develop the required foresight to safeguard their societies and communities.
Mm. I guess in a way it sounds like it's a bit of a blueprint for the coalition. When we set the coalition up, we were hoping it would be that representation and then activism across the profession. So yeah, I'll look more into that and see if we can learn from them. Okay, so if you imagine one shift that could positively change the next chapter or shape the next chapter of coaching, what would it be?
I think we should lean into this, Susan. You know, I always like to joke. This is not true, but this is a joke I like to make that lawyers often go to law school because they're scared of technology. And so that's also true of many very empathy first, human centered service providers like coaches. In my conversations as a volunteer with ICF, where I help across many different activities, I'm an MRG moderator for the BIPOC MRG, that's a member resource group for Black, Indigenous people of color. I volunteer on the DEIB Diversity Council, Global Diversity Council, and I'm working with you in all of this. What I notice is this tremendous trepidation, anxiety, nervousness around what is this AI? Are you going to get kicked out? Because sometime back, Google had debuted. Do you remember this? Sometime mid-year last year, they debuted their DeepMind life coaching. And I remember a lot of people, all right, that's it. I guess this profession is done. And so there's a lot of anxiety about,
Mm,
oh, we're going to be replaced. Of course, we won't be replaced because nothing can entirely replace the tremendous depth of compassion and intuition humans bring.
mm,
Uh, so, if anything, I would say coaches out there lean in. We can engage with digital and AI to enhance our services and to provide coverage and structure in ways that can bring tremendous support to the clients and make everything so much more possible. It elevates the experience, enhances what is possible, and essentially prepares our clients for how to navigate their experiences in the digital and AI world in their
Mm,
professional and personal lives too.
mm. Yes, and I think if coaches enable or use AI as a partner for the transactional things, it gives them more time to be present in the human space with their clients. Yeah.
You know, I'll offer a very personal take that's certainly out of scope. I personally like to think of coaches today as really first respondents in a society that is reeling from rapid change
Mm,
and so much upheaval. In many ways, if we are able to engage safely and with great intellectual curiosity, some of these new abilities that we have developed for ourselves, the tools and resources we have, if we are able to lean into that, embrace it in a safe, healthy way, and show how it can be used to benefit everyone for the greater good, in many ways, we are role modeling what safe, truly productive and effective engagement can look like for everybody else. And so that'd be a great bonus if we could do that.
absolutely. I love that vision. And looking on the horizon, what about coaching changes and what stays the same?
So, a few different things. I'm a nerd. I know, Susan, that you and I enjoy this kind of stuff. So, for example, interactions without any safety check-ins. That's one. And the second thing to think about is many controlled trials have taken place that show that this combination that we are working on today, human-centered AI, can have terrific impact. For example, the structure that AI can provide to a client's understanding, the way AI tools can help match coaches and clients even better, almost like a brilliant dating software, right? The way, for example, beyond my pattern recognition, if I have a tool that helps me recognize my own patterns to improve my coaching ability, do I sometimes make a noise that distracts a client while talking? Do I sometimes ask closed off questions? I know you are doing this coaching too. We all know open questions are the thing to do and not closed off. What if I sometimes slip into that? What if there are patterns that we are able to assess on the client's way of speaking that can help open up something that we haven't yet scoped out in our human interactions? So, structure, pattern recognition, touch points, and nudges for behavioral changes like CBT.
Hmm.
Um, those are some of the things that tools can help coaches with, and that is so exciting. And so many coaches, and I'm the BIPOC MRG, with all of the privileges required to run a coaching business too,
Mm,
technology, ability to have staff to do some of the administrative heavy loads, nudges. If you really want to have beautiful client experiences, we want those nudges and those check-ins. All of this can be scaled and made accessible, whether it is a client or a coach with disability challenges, accessibility challenges, neurodiversity, a very specific trauma recovery, for example. So there's so many possibilities in terms of scale, in terms of access, democratization. It's all good stuff, right?
absolutely. Yes. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing all of your experience and insights, Kaumudi. It's been really fascinating. And in particular, all the legislative stuff from the EU that's been very illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It was a lovely chat.